Welcome, my friends, to another episode of Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. Today, we are going to be doing our first episode, studying we'll talk about in a moment, whether it is truly a shoot safer, Likutei Sichos of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and we'll be talking about the topic of medical treatment that is scheduled prior to Shabbos. And we have Rabbi Yossi Kamman, who will be presenting with us today. Rabbi Yossi Kamman serves as a Chabad Shliach in Stamford, Connecticut, and directs a Hasidish Daher, a Chabad educational organization. Through various mediums, primarily its monthly English magazine, Daher promotes and teaches the history, teachings, ideas, and philosophy of Chabad to people of all ages, with a particular emphasis on Lubavitcher Rebbe's legacy. Rabbi Kamman and his wife Chani are blessed with 6 wonderful children, Bli Ayin Hara, and it's an honor to have you actually in our community of Stamford. Now, today's episode is actually sponsored, it's dedicated by Lev Podelko in honor of the upcoming 30th wedding anniversary of his parents, Marina and Dr. Alexander Podelko. Their commitment to our Batzis Torah inspires me and has certainly elevated both the quantity and quality of learning opportunities in our very own community. I should add also that we share a mutual affinity for Lagavulin and all forms of peaty scotch, which certainly puts them on the highest of madrigas in my books. Anyway, back to Rabbi Kamman. Rabbi Kamman, so it's a privilege to have you here on the podcast. I always say you're the, I don't know if it's official, but at very least the de facto shliach of the Rebbe to Congregation Agudas Shalom. And I guess since this will be our first episode having a Lubavitcher Chassid and discussing the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that makes you as of now the de facto shliach to shoot first, ask questions later. So given that introduction, maybe before we jump into the particular shaila that's in Likutei Sichos, maybe you could tell us, give our listeners, give myself a little bit of an overview and a taste for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then we could appreciate this particular scenario that we'll be delving into shortly.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Kurtz. It's a privilege and an honor to be here and to be the shliach to this podcast. And thank you for being persistent and making sure that I'm here. So, yashakayach.
And gotta thank Lev for ensuring that we eventually get a Chabad episode up here. So okay. It's really, he deserves the thank you. So we'll pass it along to him. I'm sure he'll be listening and shepping nachas.
Thank you, Lev, and mazel tov to Alex and Marina on the 30th wedding anniversary, which brings me to 30 because in a few weeks on Gimel Tammuz is the 30th yahrzeit of the Rebbe. So it's an appropriate time to have a podcast to talk about the Rebbe right before the yahrzeit.
Wow, I did not even think about that. I guess you could say it was perhaps divine providence, or
must be
Rebbe's providence, however you want to look at it.
Must be. Okay, so a little bit about the Rebbe, which kind of ties into what we're discussing here, because this podcast is dedicated to shoot first, and traditionally. The Rebbe didn't really write Shalos or Tshuvos because the Rebbe didn't act as a Moreh Hira, as a Paisek in that sense, which kind of brings in, I mean, some of the Chabad Rebbes did fill that role, such as the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, who founded Chabad, such as the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad. But what's very interesting about the Rebbe, and in general about the Chabad Rebbes, is that many people attribute different qualities to the Rebbe. Whether he was a tzaddik, whether he was a ga'on, whether he was a world leader, a Jewish leader, a visionary, hashkafik, with relevance to the Jewish world, the trajectory of the Jewish world. And what's interesting about the Rebbe is that all of these things are true, and that's kind of something that's why the Rebbe, when we were talking about the Rebbe, everyone talks about the Rebbe, and he sticks out amongst the Jewish leaders of this generation, is because of that, because of the appeal that he has to so many people the way they are. Which basically in Chabad we talk about a Rebbe, it's called a Nasi. A Nasi means it's like the head. The head cares about all parts of the body, cares about the arm, cares about the heart, cares about the foot, from the highest of the highest to the lowest of the lowest. So in the Rebbe's Torah itself, he kind of does the same thing. So let's say, for example, the Rebbe would have a Farbrengen on Shabbos afternoon. So in one Farbrengen, it can last for 5 hours with talks dispersed with the Gunim, 45 minutes each. And he could talk about the parsha. He could talk about what time of year it is and the lessons to learn from that. He can go on to ask questions like he did every Shabbos to explain a Rashi. Then he would explain a Rambam. Then he would give a Hasidic Maimer, which is like the classical Hasidic teachings. And then in the weekday, sometimes he'll make a siyum on the Masechta or a hadron on the whole Shas.
Just 100 old shots, something we do every week, right?
Yeah, and there's a book, Hadranim and Siyumim from the Rebbe, and it could be in one event. In one event, you could do all of these things over 12 hours, and this happened for 40 years. So we're talking about a huge area of Torah. There's tens of books. There's a set of letters that the Rebbe wrote, which are on all topics, hashkafic, halachic, limud, and then the Rebbe's magnum opus is the Likutei Sichos, which that's what we're going to be learning from today, because those are selections from the Rebbe's talks over the years that were edited by the Rebbe himself, and it's based on the parsha, but it goes many times. Keeps on going. There's 39 volumes of it. And in the back, there's many letters, the Haisafas. So we are going to be learning from the Haisafa, which says, let me get to the specific, before we get to the specific topic, the Rebbe didn't write shuvas, and very often people would come to the Rebbe for halachic shaylas. The Rebbe would refer them to a Rav, either to any Rav or to the Rabbi Yossi Feinstein, for example.
Right, and I understand that over the years, the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rav Moshe Feinstein actually did have some kind of halachic exchanges. I know in our community, in our Shabbos and Shavuos Chabura we have here in Stanford, you gave an excellent Chabura on the question of an Israeli ship company that was operating on Shabbos, and how Lubavitcher Rebbe was like, I think egging on Rav Moshe and others that we've got to do something about this. And then, of course, there's the getting Rav Moshe a sofer to write him a new pair of Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. So there certainly were these interactions that he had that were halachic, and this is something interesting. Again, I'm not an expert in Shas Shuvos. I just host the podcast because I find it fascinating. But something I think I've noticed is that many poskim, when they're writing Shas Shuvos, they didn't just sit down one day, in most cases, and say, I'm going to write a sefer Shas Shuvos. People ask them questions and they respond, and it becomes that eventually. So sometimes they're more hashkafic. Even Rav Moshe's own shuvos, which are primarily halachic, I was just going through a series of shuvos he has on teshuva, on repentance. Right. And most of those are hashkafic. Most of them are not halachic. So in the Rebbe's case, even though he was generally giving hadrach, he was giving guidance hashkafically, philosophically, it makes sense. It's all one, you would think, unified system. So halacha has to be part of the analysis as well. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. 100%.
That's a very good, valid point. I was learning this week, the Shabbos, that I was learning a talk from the Rebbe. The Rebbe said everything that's in Chassidus has to have a makar, has to have a source in Nigla, in the revealed parts of the Torah. The Rebbe asked, why? Chassidus is not enough, Kabbalah is not enough. So I said, it is enough, but it's Torah achas. There's one Torah, so they're all interconnected. So everything has to, make sense, all over. And that's why when it came to halacha, you're right that the Rebbe did not usually write shuvas, but very often, whether it was a Chabad-related issue, such as the fifth Rebbe Chabad, the Rebbe Rashab, held that a mikveh has to have the bar should be on the tzad, not on not bar. I'm sorry, it should be bar al gabi bar. The bar should be on top of the bar, not al tzad. So the Rebbe, there's many answers and letters from the Rebbe. The Rebbe explains that and defends that, or it could be another issue like the boats, like you mentioned, or this issue that we're talking about is not related to Chabad in particular, but the Rebbe felt that there was a nichshel happening. And the Rebbe wanted to, and no one was talking about it, so the Rebbe said, I'll talk about it since I don't see anyone else talking about it.
Right, it's a b'makom shein-ish situation, meaning Correct. He would have preferred that someone who was primarily a posek by occupation would do it, but if he saw that no one else was addressing it, it was his responsibility at that point to get up there and make a mecha about it.
100%.
So that's an excellent segue to our actual primary focus for today, which is this, whatever you want to call it, a tshuva, a sicha, an igeres of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So what exactly is the case, and how does the Lubavitcher Rebbe address it?
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Should I give a 1 minute biographical sketch of the Rebbe's life, or go straight?
I thought we already. Yes. Give us the bullet points over here. The
The bullet
Wikipedia page.
points of the Rebbe is that the Rebbe was born to his parents, Harav Levi Yitzchak and Rebbe Chana Schneerson. The Rebbe's last name is Schneerson. So that means he was a distant relative of his wife, who was the previous Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe Yitzchak's daughter. And his father was first became the Hasidic rabbi, then the chief rabbi of the large city at that time was called Yekaterinoslav. Today it's called Dnieper Petrovsk, in the Ukraine. And the Rebbe grew up in a rabbinic household. He had a very interesting youth. He mainly learned with his father and by himself. He did, dabble in some other educational institutions, but a full-time yeshiva, it's not like he went.
Wasn't that did he overlap with Rosh Soloveitchik at the University of Berlin?
That's later, yes. I'll get to that in a second. So
we don't talk about that.
Yeah, of course we talk about that. So I'll get to that in a second. So he learned primarily himself. Anyone who describes Rebbe from his youth, anyone who visited the house, would basically they describe the Rebbe as someone sitting with a sefer, usually in his private room. And he also always had an interest besides in Torah, in mathematics and astrology. And the Rebbe eventually started visiting the previous Rebbe, who was banned, who first in Russia, and then once he was banished from Russia by the communists in Riga, Latvia, and eventually he met the Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Rebbe's daughter, Rebbe Tzachayim Mushka, who's his very distant relative, they got married in Poland in 1929. After they got married, they moved to Berlin, and in Berlin, the Rebbe attended the University of Berlin. And he was involved primarily not in public life, although he was doing things for his father-in-law, secretarial work and other missions, also editing a Chabad publication called the Hatamim at a certain point. And then he lived in Berlin with his wife till 1933, till Hitler came to power in Germany. He then moved to Paris. In Paris, he got his degree in electrical engineering and then also enrolled in the Sorbonne. The Rebbe attended the Sorbonne. That's so in Berlin, I believe, is where he met Rav Soloveitchik, and they spent time together. They fabrained together on Purim. There's different stories about it. And then he lived in Paris until the Nazis invaded Paris. Then he ran with his wife to the other part of France, Vichy, and from there, the previous Rebbe had already escaped from Poland from the Nazis a year earlier, and he was in America. So his father-in-law, together with the group of Hasidim in America, did tremendous work to get visas for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, and they escaped from France to via Portugal. They came to the U.S. in 1941. When he came to America, he, for the first 2 years, actually served the country with his electrical engineer degree and worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, helping the war effort.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and this is in 1940.
So he really had the understanding, he wasn't, I guess you would say, almost like born into the royalty of the Rebbehood, so to speak. Obviously, he was of that line, but he actually knew what it meant to be a rank and file balabas, who had to earn a parnasa. He had to earn a living. He had to do something that wasn't as glamorous before he ascended to Rebbehood.
Yeah, and when they were trying to get a visa for the Rebbe, there was a problem because the Hasidim in America wrote to the government that he's a rabbi, and then he wrote that he's an engineer. It was a contradiction.
It's a steer minei bay, right?
Yeah, no, the government had a problem.
How's that shtiv? How does that go together? Can't be both.
When he came to America, what happened was his father-in-law put him in charge of the publication house of Lubavitch, of Kahas, of America's Inyan Chinuch, which was the educational arm of Chabad, and of Machane Yisrael, the social services. And that's when he got thrown into public life. So when his father-in-law passed away in 1950, all the Hasidim knew him already, and it was clear to them that this is the Rebbe. He's the one that's worthy of being Rebbe. And 1951, he became the official Rebbe of Lubavitch. So that but you're right, there was a shift sort of in the trajectory of the Rebbe's life, and some people might even say of what he wanted the trajectory to be, and it was, it was forced upon him.
Does his university or professional experience inform any of his writings?
Well, for example, the boat thing that you mentioned, where the Rebbe held that the Israeli boats in the 1950s, they constitute complete Chilul Shabbos and therefore should be avoided by any frum Jew or any Jew for that matter. The Rebbe, if we in that tshuva that we learned, the Rebbe says that to say that there's no Isser is not only Amaratis in Torah, but it's Amaratis in engineering. Because anyone that's an engineer can know that it's not possible to have something running automated for so long. So I guess the answer is yes.
He's a real Torah U'Mada figure without even going to YU. Look at that.
Although the Rebbe advises Hasidim not to go to college, so we can talk about that in a different podcast.
This reminds me. It's something I saw in the yeshiva Shavelt. You'll have. I remember one of my secular studies principals growing up for Limudei Chol. So I think he went to YU, and he said, guys, I saw what they do over there, and I'm coming back as essentially he was saying, I come back as a Baal Tshuva, and I'm telling you, you don't need it, guys. Don't go over there. It's not good for you. So you see that many times where people say, I experienced that, and trust me, you're better off not having any of it. So anyway, so this is a wonderful overview of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I'm sure there's a lot more to say about his life. In fact, there's biographies that are out there on him, but I think we should probably get to this particular tshuva, which I'm sure will bring out also broader Yesodos as well.
Perfect. Okay, so the question here that in this, so it's written like sort of like a tshuva. Look at the Sichos, volume Tezayin, volume 16, page 518. It's actually adapted from a talk of the Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't. Most of the Rebbe's teachings were not written by himself. Most of them were transcribed from his talks. And some of them were edited. So this is a transcription from what the Rebbe said, but it's written very much in a tshuva, and it's highly footnoted, all presented that way.
Do we know if he got to review it before it was published?
Yeah, so this was reviewed by the Rebbe before.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
I'm sure if there was something very scandalous, someone would have brought it to his attention.
It definitely was on the behest of the Rebbe, something that a specific topic that the Rebbe spoke about, that the Rebbe wanted to be published on its own. So that's definitely, it was prepared for publication on its own. So the Rebbe basically starts off the truth saying that in the United States, there's something that happens where there's something called an elective surgery, where we set up and we schedule a surgery that needs to be done. It's not an emergency, but it needs to happen. And the way it works is that you have to come to the hospital, and you have to stay there for a few days, or at least in a summer day, at least for one whole long day. And sometimes they schedule this for Erev Shabbos. And the Rebbe says this is many people don't even realize that there's a shaila here. And the Rebbe says, I'm here to be ma'arer and to tell everyone that not only is there a shaila, but it may be completely usser, and then I'll explain why it's usser. Okay.
I always love hearing things that people always thought were heter gumor and absolutely permissible, and it's wrong. So let's hear why. What's the problem with scheduling elective surgery not on Shabbos but prior to Shabbos?
Exactly. So I just want to mention that the Rebbe mentioned, this is not here, but the Rebbe mentioned another time, and I want to mention that also in the magazine that I published in the Derher, he wrote an article about this in English. So if someone wants to see this overview in English, we could send a link as well to that article.
Sure, we'll actually send me the link, and we'll put it in the show notes for everyone's convenience.
Perfect. So the Rebbe said on a different occasion that the reason why this, why is no one else talking about this? And the Rebbe said, I think I know why. Because in previous generations, there was no such thing as an elective surgery, because there was no tests, and people were, by the time when you showed up to a doctor when you were very sick,
there's already pikuach nefesh at that point.
At that point, it's pikuach nefesh. It's only thanks to the medical advancement that we have, different various tests and, blood tests and things like that we can say, oh, something is wrong, and therefore you should schedule a surgery, for a few months from now, a few weeks from now, a few days from now. So that's why the Rebbe says, I feel this wasn't discussed amongst the Paiskim, because the scenario didn't really exist until this generation. So that's
okay. So what's the precedent that he points to? Probably in Shas, I would imagine.
Okay, so he starts off and he says, I will tell you why it's Asr, but min hakal el hakavod. We're going to start off with the lighter Isser, and then we'll move on to the heavy.
And Malab Kedusha Vevo Rita, right? We're going to accelerate and build up.
Accelerate. So the first thing is in Shas, and it's in Shulchan Aruch also. There's a halacha that we do not go on a boat less than 3 days before the Shabbos. Mm-hmm. Why? Bishum Einig Shabbos. Because of Einig Shabbos. What does that mean? Because whenever you go, it says in Shulchan Aruch, whenever you go on a ship, it takes you, there's all this tsar, all this bilbo, all these things that are happening. You're getting used to the rocky boats. You're getting seasick or something like that. It takes you 3 days to get used to it. So if you go on a ship within 3 days, you're disturbing your Einik Shabbos, and therefore it's usher to go on a ship from Wednesday on because of Einik Shabbos, not even because of Chilul Shabbos, just because of Einik Shabbos.
It sounds like it could be relevant also not just for shipping and for travel back in the day, but think about the advent of luxury cruises and the fact that people recreationally go on ships today. So I imagine I've never been Zeicha yet. I guess if you're listening and you run a kosher cruise, they need a rabbi. Maybe Rabbi Kamman probably also. We're willing to accept invitations, but I'd imagine the kosher cruises need to take this into account if they are truly kosher, that is.
Yeah, and this is not something, we didn't even, the Rebbe is going to compare it to the medical situation, but this is halachah and Shulchan Aruch. So if there's a terem, I don't know, but the clear Shulchan Aruch is you cannot go out unless the cruise is different because you're having a good time. I don't know, maybe
right. So the Rebbe's point is that if you, even once the surgery is done, you are adjusting to the hospital setting, and there's not going to be a lot of Oneg Shabbos during the recovery period, at least in the immediate aftermath.
Correct. So the Rebbe says that, when you go into a hospital, automatically, I know anyone who's been to a hospital, and I think it's most people, knows that the whole hospital is not a conducive place to be relaxed. First of all, you have to start changing your clothing. Then, when they wake you up and you go back to sleep and you're eating, everything, your whole schedule is off. And especially, usually when you're doing some type of medical procedure, there's going to be some discomfort and some pain, either before or afterwards or in the middle. And it's a lot greater than going, the tsar that you get from a procedure going for sure going to be a lot greater than going onto a ship. So if it's also to go onto a ship 3 days before because of Einik Shabbos, for sure it should be also to do a medical procedure. And by the way, the Rebbe says another point, not only are you causing the opposite of Einik Shabbos for you, you're causing the opposite of Einik Shabbos for your family as well.
Oh, wow.
So you're affecting others as well through this procedure, which anyone who has a family member going to a hospital knows that it's the opposite of Einik. That's for sure.
This is kind of where the Jewish leadership aspect comes in. He's not looking at the immediate circumstance, but he's thinking, broadly, what does this do for not just the individual, but for his family? He has a communal perspective on the issue.
Right, exactly.
So that's number one. So number one is the issue of a lack of Oneg Shabbos, though I imagine we could get to something a little bit juicier than just a negation of Oneg Shabbos.
I just want to point out that in the footnotes, whoever wants to look up the source, on this first point, the Rebbe goes on the bottom, there's a whole, the Rebbe goes a whole shak of Ataria. You may say this doesn't apply because of this. And then the Rebbe says it does apply, and gives a few scenarios. Rebbe tries to slug up all the slug ups that could exist in elaborate footnotes in the bottom. If we have more time, we can get into it.
So there's a real lumdus behind us. We're just getting the Cliff Notes edition.
You're getting the Cliff Notes, exactly. And then, so that's number one. So we said we're going to go minakala la kavid. We're going to tune up the Isser, the levels of Isser.
I always love tuning up the levels of Isser. Nah. Yeah, someone's going to splice that out of context. Please don't do that.
Don't do that. Okay. So the next point is that the day after the surgery, or immediately afterwards, they're going to have to do some bedikos. They're going to have to check. They're going to have to, do some medical intervention. Many of them have malachas, actual malachas that are forbidden on Shabbos. Some of them malachas that are asur min Torah, that are biblically forbidden. And even though it's pikuach nefesh, right? Because once you are under the knife, so to speak, then these things are necessary, and it's pikuach nefesh, so that's permitted. That's true. But you're not allowed to put yourself in a situation where you're going to have to rely on being Mechal Shabbos because of Pikuach Nefesh.
That's a big machlokes in general. If you're allowed to put yourself in a scenario that then you will have to rely on. And I think if I recall correctly, and perhaps he mentions this as well, the issue of boarding a boat a few days before Shabbos is because not just simply a negation of Oneg Shabbos, but it could lead within the first few days while it's getting settled to potential Pikuach Nefesh. So you are putting yourself in a position where you may need to be Mechal Shabbos on the high waters.
And in the footnotes that I mentioned earlier, the Rebbe says that even the halachah that you're allowed to go in a boat before Shabbos is only if you make up that it's going to stop for Shabbos.
Mm.
So that's not even so clear. They're allowed to go on a boat that travels on Shabbos.
It's a
And,
throwback to the other issue of the Israeli company operating the ship on Shabbos, which he
but
said
here we're
that.
talking even if it's through a Nachri, even if it's through a non-Jew, you might have to stipulate that it shouldn't go on Shabbos. Technically.
Right.
This halacha talks about this, and there have been a Tam has a shit about. There's a whole back and forth.
But what's the issue if you're sheval tas, or you're passive, and there's, he mentions, I think that, there are a lot of Jewish doctors out there, so there could be an issue of having a Jewish doctor do it. But if it's a non-Jewish doctor and you're passive, what's the issue over here?
Oh, so he says that even when a non-Jew does it, there's a problem if the Jew is being nehene from the guf of the malacha, from the actual. If the Jew is getting benefit from the actual malacha, there's a problem even for a non-Jew to do this, as is brought down in Shulchan Aruch. And also, the Rebbe says that in places that we live in, and the Rebbe uses such as New York and Boston, those are the two cities that the Rebbe says, many of the people working in the hospital are Jewish. And anybody who's been to a hospital, even in Stanford, knows that many of the nurses and many of the doctors are Jewish. And also, another issue is many of the actual things that they're doing, for example, taking your blood, etc., you need the participation of the patient to be actively involved in this. And so then that's not about a non-Jew doing it for you. You are participating in Chilul Shabbos.
Okay, so you're right. It's an issue of being misayea, that you are by, extending your arm out so that they can draw blood. So you are assisting in the process of malacha.
Correct. And the point is that this is pekuach nefesh, and it is allowed. But you're not allowed to put yourself in a situation where you will have to rely on pekuach nefesh in order to break the Shabbat.
Mm. But I think he does mention one additional issue, which is many of the things that the doctors are going to do aren't even pikuach nefesh at that point. They're just procedural checks and taking records so that the state or the Fed can have records and statistics of different issues and diseases, whatever it might be. So many of the things that they're doing might not even pertain directly to the needs of the patient. Or the immediate patient in front of you.
That's the third and final point that he makes, that many of these things are not a pikuach nefesh at all, and some of them are just for statistics, and some of them are just for protocol, and that for sure is not pikuach nefesh, and you putting yourself in that situation where that has to happen is a problem. And therefore he finishes off and he says it's an isur gamur. It's a complete isur to schedule a surgery for Erev Shabbos and even for Thursday and Wednesday. And the Rebbe says, someone wrote to me that it's impossible. Their doctor only schedules it on Friday. There's Meiser Rav. I know people that, they...
Meiser Rav Listor, he says.
Meiser Rav Listor, he says that there are people that really, as they say in Yiddish, action sich ein. They were in action, and they were able to get the surgery when they want.
Or they were pushy about it.
Yes.
They said, I want to speak with the manager.
Right. And the Rebbe says, since many people don't even know that there's a potential or actual issur here, Rebbe says, "L'fi ani is daiti mitzvah lefarsim kol alcohol evshri." It's a mitzvah to spread this as much as possible. And the Rebbe says, I just want to point out that if you want to say, yeah, but there's heterim for all of these things that you're mentioning, the Rebbe says that may be the case, but all of these potential problems altogether, there's too many heterim involved to do such a thing.
Right. It's not just each independent issue, but it's the confluence of all of them combined that you really need to do some halachic gymnastics in order to circumvent all of them. And then the question is, well, why not just schedule it on a Monday, let's say?
Right.
If it's an elective surgery, can we schedule many weeks out, or months out? Then why not schedule in a way that you're not putting yourself in that position?
100%. And
I see at the end he has a few post notes, ha'aros there.
Yeah, so he says an interesting point that this is very on the Rebbe's style. He says that in general, forget about the actual halachics, but the Gemara says in Shabbos that somebody that needs a good mazel because he's having a medical issue. The Gemara says in Shabbos, they say don't get sick, because when you get sick, they say what's your schus, what's your merit that you should be healed. And the Rebbe said, looking for merits, don't make the actual medical procedure a halachic question, because then that's the opposite of having a halachic merit. And another point he says, which is not even more of a practical, not even halachic, he says, by the way, who's going to deal with you post-surgery on Saturday and Sunday? It's going to be not the real doctor. It's going to be some new doctor, someone, some resident or something like that, because the real doctors are off on Saturday and Sunday. So the Rebbe says, even from a purely medical standpoint, it's not advisable to schedule your surgery.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't even think about that angle. So what I'm wondering is, in our final few minutes that we have together, I think that was a great overview of the Rebbe that we had earlier, as well as this interesting tshuva. Do you have any sense? Now, I would imagine, I guess, in the Chabad community, this has probably been pretty much accepted. If the Rebbe said it, then that's the end of the sugya. Do you have a sense of whether his mecha that he made was accepted by those beyond his immediate community?
So from the research that I've done, I looked around for various tshuvas on the topic, and there's the Tzitz Eliezer, and there's a few tshuvas on the topic. It seems that it's the accepted halachic opinion to avoid this.
Interesting. So did Tzitz Eliezer see what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said?
It's written earlier, but it's written a little earlier, so it's not directly addressing what the Rebbe's points. But I did see various tshuvas, not major notable ones, but I've seen things are around that basically say, some of them say exactly the Rebbe's point. They must have seen what the Rebbe said, because they're saying exactly the Rebbe's point about the Sfina. And I mean, the only thing, the Rebbe is very strong about this, and I guess each person, I know I've listened to this podcast, and I know you're careful not to paskin halachas, right? We're having a discussion. So the only thing is, if you're actually having a scenario where you need a procedure, the question is what actually constitutes an actual pikuach nefesh, where we cannot, push off the surgery and you have no choice. People, if I have in my own family, someone needed a very intense surgery, and the sooner the better, before chas v'shalom they had a heart attack. So you have to ask your posek and your rav, is that actual pikuach nefesh? But the point is, anything elective,
and your local Orthodox medical professional.
Yeah, and they have to talk together. So the point is that the degree to what constitutes the pikuach nefesh, that you should do it anyways on Friday, and what's elective, might be, I guess that's, you have room for more machmir or more makel. But that
did anybody push back on the Rebbe that you're aware of?
Not that I've seen.
I mean, obviously it's unconscionable.
Later you see a
good point
out there, but I did not see that. If anyone knows, please let me know.
All right, yeah, this is to our listeners. If you're aware of someone who is cholik either directly on Lubavitcher Rebbe on this case, or maybe the Tzitz Eliezer, or whoever else espoused this, feel free to comment, whether on Spotify, whatever platform you're listening to this on. Rabbi Kamman, so in our last minute or two that we have together, I wanted to just circle back to the Rebbe in general, and this is your opportunity to share whatever ideas you want in conclusion to our listeners. So there are many Hasidic Rebbes that have lived and are living now and will be born, I'm sure, in the future. And, the funny thing is, so even in like the Yeshiva Shavel, like if someone were to say the Rebbe, you wouldn't necessarily know it meant the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But it's interesting, kind of like when you go to more what you might call modernische circles, Stam Rebbe is the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it speaks to how widely his reputation preceded him, how much he did literally outreach kiruv to those far beyond his Hasidim. I'm curious if you could tell our listeners, what do you think, and perhaps I gave away a little bit of it already, made the Lubavitcher Rebbe unique from other Hasidic Rebbes, that to many, he became known simply as the Rebbe?
How much time do I have? An hour?
If you could get into 2 minutes.
Like I
said,
said,
it's Samsing, right? Do some Simsum.
Oh, that was another share. the Rebbe on Simsum Kipshute or not? That was another subject.
A whole other podcast.
Yeah, a whole other podcast. But the Gra. Okay, so I would say that what's unique about the Rebbe is the fact that he viewed himself as and in his role as a leader of Chabad. There's a note that the Rebbe wrote where he explains what a Rebbe is, and essentially what the Rebbe says, it's in Lashon HaKodesh, but what the Rebbe says is that essentially a Rebbe by definition is someone that doesn't have ego. and he's there for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. And the Rebbe didn't view himself, he viewed himself obviously as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but he didn't view himself merely as the Rebbe of his Hasidim. The Rebbe cared about a Jew in Bangkok, Thailand. The Rebbe cared about a child in Eretz Yisrael that does not have a Jewish education, and the Rebbe cared about his own Hasidim. So it's that broad Ahavas Yisrael, that love that he had for every single Jew, no matter where he was, or and this is the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. You have to love every single Jew, even that someone that you never met, and the Rebbe actualized that, and therefore the appeal that the Rebbe had. Menachem Begin wants to come to the Rebbe because the Rebbe loves and cares about the people in Israel, and then Moshe Feinstein writes to the Rebbe about a halachic matter, and his Hasidim are coming to him to ask him for a bracha. So you have that appeal, and what's unique about the Rebbe is also that we're talking about 30 years, the 30th yard side. The Rebbe's appeal has not diminished, and his Hasidim and many Jews around the world only come to learn more and admire the Rebbe more as the years go on, which really shows about the uniqueness of who he was and his role. And I would say the Rebbe is unique among, historically, and I would say amongst all Jewish leaders of all time, but especially of recent times, in that he sticks out in his, general worldview and care for all matters of Yiddishkeit.
I think his love for all Jews is perhaps captured by this pithy joke that you and I were discussing at the Shabbos park the other weekend. I think you know what I'm about to say. That by the Satmar, by Lubavitch, how's it go? By the Satmar, every Yid is a Shaygis. By the Lubavitchers, every Shaygis is a Yid.
Right.
So that it's a nice sharp joke, and it really, I think, it brings out those different kinds of hashkafos, though of course without the nuances. But Rabbi Kamman, thank you so much for joining us here on Shoot First, Ask Questions Later. I think our listeners will very much enjoy listening to this once it comes out. And I continue to benefit from the Torah that you share here in our community. And God willing, you should just have continued strength and continued hatzlacha in all of the harbatzas Torah you're doing, in the Hasidish Daher, and in all the other capacities that you are spreading the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a great pleasure, and you should have a lot of hatzlacha as well in your harbatzas HaTorah and in your personal life.
Amen.